Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Live from Steepleview Farm. The sun came out a few minutes ago. It's just another gorgeous day here, so I hope it's the same in your world, and you're having a wonderful weekend so far. It is time to think about our gardens, and as we do every week, the first thing we do is we check the weather to see whether Mother Nature is going to assist us in our gardening plans. And well, this week it looks as if we're going to have a considerable amount of rain. We've had a lot of rain already. Rain is good for growing things, not so good for planting. Next week, we're going to show you a video of where we have gone into the garden this coming week. Our planting day is currently scheduled for Wednesday, based upon the weather forecast. As you look at Wednesday, it looks like there are going to be some showers. That's going to rain Tuesday. It's going to rain Monday. And that means we're going to probably end up with a little bit of wet soil under our feet. But next week, we're going to show you a video of how we set up our garden using woven ground fabric, which has allowed us to plant even in muddy weather or rainy weather, muddy ground. The other thing we want to check is we want to check for the upcoming week, whether or not we're going to be able to plant according to the Farmer's Almanac. We're going to be good today. Today, the 16th, is still a good day for planting. Sunday and Monday, not so good. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday would be good days for planting, which is one of the reasons why we chose those days to be the days on which we're going to plant our big garden. I mean, we've got trailer loads of transplants that we picked up from our grower just yesterday. Thousands upon thousands of transplants will be going into the ground, and we hope to get our garden fully planted within a day, maybe 2 days. That's about it. This week, as we're getting ready to plant our tomatoes, I had several questions from viewers, and thank you all for sending me questions and for sharing this channel and sharing this project. Don't forget, we are now on YouTube. You can go to our YouTube channel, which is Steepleview Farm. You can watch this same video instead of watching it on your smartphone or on your computer. You could watch the show on YouTube, on your smart TV, if you care to. And when you're there, if you go to our YouTube channel, please, we invite you to subscribe and hit the little bell there. That little bell is a notification indicator, and it means that when new content posts, if we post a seminar video, if we post something about gardening, we post something other than our live show, you'll get notification of it. This week, the overriding question that I got was, what is the best kind of tomato to plant? And you know, over the years, I think that I've probably raised a couple of hundred tomato varieties trying to find one that fits. And don't we all just absolutely love it when mater season arrives? There's nothing better than vine ripened tomatoes, and I know we can't wait. But you know, a lot of people, I think, when they talk about the kind of tomato to raise, what they want to raise, there are several things for us to think about, several things for you to think about as we begin the process of selecting the tomato varieties that we want to grow in our garden. And now is the time. I mean, with the stay at home, stay healthy program kind of winding down, people getting themselves ready to move back into society, going to the box stores, the garden centers, or even coming here to Steepleview Farm, where we sell tomato transplants. A lot of people this weekend and this coming week are going to be going out and buying tomato plants. And so the question, what is the best kind of tomato to plant? It's a very good question, particularly at this point in the year. But before we talk about which variety to plant, let's talk about how long it takes to grow a tomato. This is a chart that's published by the Kentucky Proud people in Kentucky. If you look down near the bottom, you see that the harvest season for tomatoes is right around the 1st of July. I've always considered it to be quite a success to have tomatoes by the 1st of July. If you check the seed packet, for example, when you buy tomato seeds, many of them will tell you that they're 70 to 100 days before maturity. A lot of people don't even know what maturity means. Well, maturity means fruit set. So from the time you plant a seed until it finally germinates and extends its first set of leaves above the soil, from that point until fruit set, that's when the very first fruits set, that's days to maturity. It then takes a while for those to become these gorgeous vine-ripened tomatoes. That doesn't happen the first week. That doesn't happen the first day. Now you've got additional time to grow the tomatoes. So think about that when you buy a tomato plant. You're looking at July, maybe mid-July, maybe the 1st of August before you get those delicious vine-ripened tomatoes. So now we know that tomato availability is a factor. If you're in a hurry, look at a tomato variety online. There's just tons of information out there about varieties. Look at a tomato variety online that's going to fit your schedule. Last thing you want to do is plan your family vacation the week that all your tomatoes become ripe and you count on your neighbors to go pick them for you and there's none left for you to eat. But as you start to think about what kind of tomato to grow, one of the most important things for you to think about is where you're going to grow it. What kind of experience do you have with growing tomatoes? There are a couple of different types of tomatoes, two general categories that you ought to consider. There are indeterminate tomatoes and determinate tomatoes. Indeterminate tomatoes are vine tomatoes. A vining tomato can grow in the proper environment 20, 30 feet long. The way it grows is it continues to produce fruit all season long at the top of the vine. And as you harvest the fruit off of the bottom of the vine, you strip off the leaves until you've ultimately got really nothing more than just a blank stem for several feet, nothing on it, no leaves, no fruit, no nothing, because once the fruit produces as it goes up the vine, it only produces further up the vine. A tomato vine can be trellised on a fence. It can be trellised in the field. It can be trellised in a greenhouse or a high tunnel, but it needs support. The tomato vine itself also needs care and attention. You'll see on this little chart, it has an increased yield when pruned. Now, what kind of pruning do you do on a tomato plant to make it grow and make it produce? One thing you're going to do on an indeterminate tomato is you're going to prune the leaves off below the fruit clusters. You're going to prune the leaves off below the fruit when it's actually forming. Once the fruit is formed and you've picked it and then new fruit clusters of flowers come on up the vine, you'll prune below those. But there are some other things that you want to look at when you're talking about a tomato plant, particularly an indeterminate tomato plant. You have your main stem. Off of the main stem, you have leaves, and they're very identifiable. They usually grow long. A lot of people think those are other stems. They're actually just leaves, but that's the way they look. They look like a stem with leaves on the side, but the entire formation, that entire formation is a leaf. If you'll look right at the very bottom, if you'll look right in that little armpit, that little crotch-like area between the leaf and the main stem, you'll see what's called a sucker. One of the things you want to do on an indeterminate tomato plant is you want to go through and just pinch out those suckers that grow right in that little branch between the leaf and the main stem. pinch out those suckers. Why? Those are going to be complete tomato plants. They're going to take energy away from the tomato plant you're trying to get fruit from. That sucker is going to grow a new tomato plant from the start, and it too is going to have its own leaves. It's going to have its own suckers. It's going to produce a lot of problems for you down the road. It's going to get heavy. It's going to break off. You want most of your fruit growing off of the main stem, not off of the suckers. Now, some people will allow 1 or 2 suckers to form. They think it gives them more fruit. That's fine. That's particularly true sometimes with cherry tomatoes. But if you're growing beefsteak tomatoes or big round tomatoes, heavy tomatoes that weigh 3/4 of a pound or more, those suckers are going to be a problem for you. So when you're looking at your tomato plant and you see those suckers on an indeterminate tomato plant in the little crotch between the leaf and the main stem, you want to pick those out. But then look at the other part of your tomato plant. Very important is a fruit cluster or a flower cluster. Do not, I recommend to you, do not sucker your tomato plants above a fruit cluster. Try to find a fruit cluster or flower cluster, 1 or 2 of them, and look for suckers below that point. Why? Because one of the other things you'll see on the top of your tomato plant here is the growing tip. In a really robust patch of tomatoes, as you're going through and looking for suckers, it's possible to make a mistake and accidentally pinch off that growing tip. If you pinch off the growing tip, that's it. That tomato vine has stopped growing at that point. That's a vine. It's going to extend itself. It's going to continue to grow all season long, but it's going to grow from the growing tip. So it's safe if you look at the tomato plant and you're going to go in and pinch out the suckers. If you're looking at it, look for the flower cluster. Look for the suckers below the flower cluster. If there's any above that, leave them there. If there are any suckers above a flower cluster, leave them there until you see another flower cluster further up. The flower cluster will form on your main stem. So your flower clusters will, like your leaves, come out of the main stem. So as the vine is growing, look for those flower clusters. They will be on your main stem. That way, if you're suckering below a flower cluster, you're not going to accidentally pinch off the growing tip and then stop the growing of your tomato vine. But don't forget, there's another kind of tomato as well, a determinate tomato. A determinate tomato is a bush tomato. It will grow to a predetermined size. Whatever that height is, might be 3 feet, might be 4 feet tall. A determinate tomato does not get pruned. You do not expect it to grow as a vine, so you don't go in and sucker it. You can, but you are limiting the amount of tomatoes you might get. The other thing about a determinate tomato is that it will produce most of its fruit over a short period of time, usually 1 to 3 weeks. Now, a determinate tomato, because it is shorter, because it is more compact, because the tomatoes do not, the vine doesn't need to be, well, it's actually not a vine, it's a bush, but because the bush or the plant doesn't need to be pruned, it can be cared for a lot more simply than a indeterminate tomato, a vine. No pruning's required, no trellising's required. Probably helps to put some sort of support around it, maybe a stick, maybe a cage. But the nice thing about a determinate tomato, because it's a limited amount of size, all the tomatoes produce about the same time, and it's compact, it's great for container gardening. If you wanted to put a determinate tomato in a pot or a bucket or something out on your deck or your patio, it's the perfect kind of tomato for that kind of growing. Now, don't forget, if you're going to grow an indeterminate tomato, this thing's going to grow big. You're going to have some room. Trellis it against a fence, trellis it against a tall stake, trellis it with string. We'll talk about all of those methods later in the year after our season gets started and our tomatoes get in the ground. But as it relates to tomatoes, these are the 2 basic types that you want to look for, indeterminate or determinate. And if you're going to a reputable garden center, some of the big box stores, they will tell you on the tag which it is. So depending upon your own particular growing conditions, look for the designation of determinate or indeterminate on the tag. And if it's not on the tag, ask the people who are selling it to you, because that becomes very important. Now, one last little piece of information for those of you who are going to go out and can't wait to get your tomatoes in the ground. I want you to look at another structure on a tomato plant that you maybe never thought about. This is a tomato plant growing in its what I would call transplant medium. That is, this tomato plant has not been planted in the field. This tomato plant is probably in a pot, maybe a large, it looks like a clay pot there, but a larger pot. It could be planted in a transplant pot, like the one that I'm holding right here. You could buy your tomato plants. They come in a little pot like this, 3 or 4 inch pot. But when you get them, I want you to look for this structure. You see that stem? Do you see all those hair-like structures coming off? You're also going to see 2 other leaves coming off. Those are called seed leaves or cotyledon leaves. What they mean is those are the first leaves that form when the seedling emerges from the soil. Now, those leaves don't do anything. They're useless. You can pinch those off. But when you see a tomato plant with hairs on it like this, let me just tell you, don't stick that in the ground at the soil level where it comes out of the pot. Take that tomato plant and prune off the leaves, all of the leaves, not just the cotyledon leaves. Prune off all the leaves all the way up to about this far from the top. Just leave the last 2 or 3 sets of leaves at the top of that plant. Don't worry about it. You're not going to hurt it. Strip the leaves off so that you've got a big long stem and you've got just a few leaves at the top. And then bury that plant all the way in the ground where just those leaves are sticking out. All of those hairs are going to form new roots. All of that stem is going to extend roots into the ground. The more roots you've got, the healthier your plant will be. The more nutrient uptake you'll get, and the more stable the plant will be. It's not going to break off if it gets windy. It's not going to fall over if it gets muddy, because it's going to send roots out all through the soil from those little parts of the tomato plant that you maybe never noticed before. For the experienced growers, you know all about this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But for those of you who are going to try and have a good tomato harvest this year, whether it's an indeterminate or a determinate tomato, once you know how to take care of them and prune them, at the end of the year, you're going to be rewarded with a rich harvest of delicious tomatoes just in time for mater season later this summer, in probably July sometime, if you're getting your tomatoes in the ground this week. Well, that's it for the show today. I just want to say thanks for joining us. Don't forget, go to our YouTube channel. Try your level best to subscribe and hit the little bell for notifications. As we move forward, you'll get notified when new content posts. And don't forget, we're here every Saturday morning at 11:30 right here on Facebook. Hope to see you next week, God willing, and God bless.